Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel. Really excited to be here. So first of all, I'd really like to just thank and acknowledge the organizers of the symposium today for inviting me to moderate this exciting session. We really appreciate your time and attention today. A distinguished panel. Let me just quickly introduce the panel members. Our session today will be debate, will be interactive, and will be focused on the big issues around how new discoveries disrupt the industry, with a really sort of focus on the biopharma revolution. What's the role of the industry in preserving society's well-being? So very topical with regards to what we've been facing on a global scale over the last 12 months. My distinguished panel is composed of the following members. Professor Spyros Artavanis-Tsakonas is Professor Emeritus at the Cell Biology Department at Harvard Medical School. Dr. George Yancopoulos. George is President and Chief Scientific Officer at Regeneron. Professor Eliot Sorel, who's the Clinical Professor of Global Health Policy at the Washington University. Also an expert on the WHO, WBG, and the OECD. And Mr. Theodoros Tryfon, Vice President of ELPEN and co-CEO of the ELPEN Group, President of the Panhellenic Union of Pharmaceutical Industries. So again, an illustrious group of individuals, and I'm certainly looking forward to the debate today. We don't have any formal presentations. This is going to be a debate of topical issues, and certainly looking forward to that. So let's jump straight into the discussion. We've been faced with almost a crisis on a global scale over the last 12 months. And I think, the world had to become agile, had to focus on innovation, a number of key external stakeholders from the ecosystem having to come together and look at innovation. Look at how we can leverage our scientific and our drug development areas of focus. What have we learned? What were some of those key learnings and those key experiences? I'd like to focus on that, but I'd also like to really bear in mind the future state. How do we apply all these learnings to the future? But maybe let's kind of reflect on the past a little bit and maybe the present in terms of innovation and scientific areas of focus. Let's jump into the discussion. Spyros, maybe you can share some of your initial thoughts around some of those areas. Where have we found ourselves? How did we need to be agile and pivot? What are the learnings? And how do we continue to apply? But let's open up the debate. Spyros, please.
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me in this discussion. Not quite debate. I'm not so sure that it will be a debate, but it will be at least a discussion. I think that one of the most important lessons, in my view, is that research and good research is not anymore a luxury, but a necessity. It's not something that is doing research of high quality is something that is essential if we are to apply these knowledge and to the benefit of society and medicine. The miracle, if let's call it like that, of the COVID vaccine has been rests upon 2-3 decades of very basic work. And so I think that what in my view needs to be followed is to support research and high quality research such that we can actually help medicine and help society. Transforming drugs, as I'm sure that George will confirm, need to rest on the kind of research that will allow you to discover new biology, and then use your brain and your inventiveness to apply it in a good way. So my big lesson from this is, and my big call is, please support research.
Absolutely. Thank you, Spyros. George, I think to the point that Spyros had made around that scientific innovation, how to harness it, how to nurture it. And you've been in this area of drug development for very many years and key accomplishments. Thoughts from your side, please.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Spyros. Now, I have to say that I also hope that we will have learned as a society very important lessons during this pandemic, how we're so dependent on science and innovation for our very survival. This is a lesson that should already have been so clear to us, but I'm afraid that it'll be a short-term memory and a lot of people will actually forget it. And this is something that we will have to continue to try to do a much better job of communicating and explaining to all of society that literally the future of humanity, the very survival of humanity, depends on our ability to innovate and do the science that's going to come up with solutions for all of our problems, whether it's a pandemic, the more ongoing problem of disease burden in society, which we're increasingly not going to be able to deal with, or things like climate change. It's all going to depend on science and innovation. I think the other lesson, I think many people have misunderstood how, whether it be the vaccines that you mentioned or the antibody cures that companies like Regeneron have developed, they think that somehow we pivoted on a dime and we all of a sudden innovated out of nowhere to come up with vaccines or antibody cures almost overnight. And we've learned something that why don't we just do this in the future whenever there's a challenge? Once again, that's a failure of science and scientists to communicate, and we have to do a much better job of educating society. As Spyros said, the real science and innovation that led to our ability so very quickly to develop vaccines or antibody cures was dependent on decades of investment in basic science and in technology innovation, which frankly, we didn't even understand what the application in our field does not happen overnight. Cures, development of the technologies to make either vaccines or these antibody cures literally depended on decades of both basic science starting from academia and technology innovation that continued at biopharma companies. And these are things so important for society to understand. There's nothing more important for our survival as a species to appreciate the value of science and innovation, but also to understand that to be prepared, we have to have done the decades worth of work to put us in a position to respond. I really hope somehow we can do a better job to communicate this, because policymakers, government, so forth, they don't understand these things. And increasingly, I think that, we're seeing, the systems, both in academia and the investments and the incentives that are necessary for a capitalist economy to drive investment in the private sector. We're seeing these under attack. And we should have been slapped in the face with this incredible lesson due to this pandemic and what's helping get us out of it and survive it. And I think we have to continue to do a much better job to explain that it all depends in the investment in the basic sciences sector and in the private sector, and to be able to drive the incentives to even do this at higher levels than we've been doing.
I think you're right, George, and, thank you for that context. I remember when I was just a young boy and I was scientifically very curious. I wanted to, be able to plan and conduct, that big experiment with big ideas. And you're absolutely right. Theodoros also shared with us some really fascinating, data around vaccine development around COVID-19 and how timelines were compressed. But you're absolutely right. It's been based on decades worth of scientific innovation and then the coming together in a very collaborative and collective manner. But Eliot, let me turn it to you as well. I know that you've got some really interesting viewpoints. I read some of your publications as well, viewpoints from you, and then certainly want to hear from Theodoros as well in terms of some of the practicalities around that collaboration and coming together. Eliot, please.
Thank you, Pantelli. And thank you, Spyros and George. I totally agree with my colleagues. I'll just only want to add a few things. First, I'd like to posit that science, first of all, is essential to health and well-being. Second, science is essential for sustainable economic development and well-being. So right off the bat, I think we need to be developing a better communication with policymakers as to the value of science, both for health and well-being, as well as for sustainable economic development. That translation we have not done a good job at. So that is a challenge for us to develop a language that communicates clearly to the policymakers and to the public the essential nature of the benefits of science for health, well-being, sustainable economic development. Second, I think us, with the point made by Spyros and George, to sustain innovative science, we need to allocate and invest early on in education to stimulate curiosity, to stimulate entrepreneurship, and to stimulate innovation. All three: curiosity, innovation, entrepreneurship. That needs to be an integral part of the educational system that starts very early in life, not at the university level. It's late. I mean, of course you need to do it at university level, but you need to start very early. I would say even from pre-K. Thirdly, I would say that the issues that affect all of us, and that very well demonstrated by and catalyzed by this pandemic, is the extraordinary leap. Let's say to develop the hepatitis B vaccine, it took 16 years, right? For the measles, it took about 10 years. For the COVID-19, it took about less than a year. That's an extraordinary leap. But as George and Spyros underlined, this didn't happen in less than a year. People should not misunderstand that somehow in less than a year this was developed. No, it took many years of investigation, of trying and trying again, of innovating. And we're very grateful to the colleagues from University of Pennsylvania, Katalin Maricu and Dave Weisberg, that developed the mRNA methodology. So in sum, I would say that we have a very hopeful sign here of what science can deliver, but we need to kind of be cautioned that this does not happen on a short-term basis and requires a sustainable involvement in investment and a collaboration between the public and private sector. And ultimately, I think the job we need to do, need to enhance our better communication to communicate to the public and policymakers about the need to continue a robust investment in science and a collaboration between the public, private, and the philanthropic sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. I see just a couple of questions coming through on the chat with regards to some of the areas of focus and debate here. Eliot, to your point around communication, sharing of information, being articulate in that particular regard, are we doing a good job with regards to broadening that scope and ensuring that there is a good understanding of benefit risk, for example? What are your thoughts? Spyros, I see you reacting as well. What are your thoughts?
I think we're not doing a very good job. I think this is a major challenge to science. I think we are very good at science. We have not been very good at translating and communicating that to decision makers. That is a tall order that needs to be put on a very fast track, and I would say on a par to scientific discovery.
Yeah. Spyros, please, I know that you had some commentary as well.
But so I agree. I mean, I think that we're not doing a very good job. But I think that we're getting informed now on the basis of a crisis. So we have a crisis and we're being informed. You open the newspapers, in Greece or anywhere else, actually. And there are more experts than viruses, to be honest. We're getting misinformation and information. And I think one of the things which is clear to people who have never thought about biology before is that there is good biology and there is bad biology. There's good science and there is bad science. This is why I was saying that we should invest in quality science. The other thing which is important to mention is that the authorities, all right, the governments, whatever that form takes, they have a very short both memory and patience. As George very, very, very astutely said, discoveries to be implemented take a long time, take a very long time. And you know, this is something which is this is not very well understood. And you know, having a very short patience means this is a recipe for disaster, really, rather than success.
Yeah.
And one thing that Eliot said, which is so true about communicating this to policymakers and them not understanding. Let me just give a small example of what I see. What I see is that policymakers, because they're not inherently scientists and because we haven't communicated the process well enough, and the fact that innovation, especially in biopharma space, but also I think true innovation in general, often takes decades. Their solutions are much more what they see in front of them. They can understand
exactly right
about applying today's solutions for tomorrow's problems. They can't imagine the unimaginable. They can't imagine we need a whole new vision. They would never have imagined 10 years ago to support mRNA technology, okay, because it had no value at the time. And I see this right now. As you guys may know, we not only developed an Ebola treatment, but a COVID-19 treatment, but an Ebola treatment. The government comes to us and they're very interested in stockpiling these things and supporting it, maybe to the tunes of let's make stockpiles for billions of dollars. They don't understand. I'm not saying that doing things, applying today's solutions for the possibility of being prepared for tomorrow, that we shouldn't consider that. But they don't understand that it's much more important to take billions, frankly, 10% of that, and be investing in what really could change the future. Maybe there's some technology we're not imagining today, so we don't need stockpiles, you know, 5 or 10 years from now. But they don't think that way, and because they're not scientists. And we, like Eliot said, somehow we have to do a better job of communicating. Another thing that Eliot said, and I noticed that, you know, one of the comments spoke to this, about the fact that I couldn't agree more, that it starts at an early age, that we have to be doing a much better job. I do think that curiosity is a natural human phenomenon. Part of the problem is we're probably killing it, but we're also probably not finding the truly unusual and exceptional young kids and nurturing them. I'm sorry, society has to understand not everybody is an Albert Einstein. Okay, we have to find the Albert Einsteins wherever they might be at a young age, and we have to make sure that we don't kill, you know, their abilities and their talents, and we have to do a much better job of nurturing them and developing them, because they're part of the solution as well. And I think that even 30, 40, 50 years ago when I was growing up, I think we were doing a much better job of society of recognizing very young talent and doing the best that we can do to nurture them. And I think that we have to recognize that not everybody, you know, not everybody will have that ability, but the rare people that do, as a society, we need them. We need to find them. We need to, wherever they might be, and we need to nurture that to really get the most out of everybody who has that ability.
Agreed. And I think it goes back to the point that we were discussing earlier around, you know, only being able to, you know, really motivate and not stifle that scientific curiosity. I agree. We need to implement processes and programs to ensure that we're guiding in the right way, we're connecting in the right way from a scientific perspective. and we're nurturing that degree of talent, because we will be faced with, continued challenges and crises. And we need to be ready. We need to be able to translate from these lessons and experiences, and we have to be practical. But in that particular regard, Theodoros, let me turn it over to you. Viewpoint from your perspective as well, just with some of the practicalities in mind. But would certainly love to hear your thoughts.
Well, good afternoon or good morning to all of you. It's a great honor being in this really esteemed panel. Well, of course, what was mentioned here is what are some very, very specific problems of economies and countries like Greece. Because sometimes in order to survive, especially in a weak economy, you focus, and especially politicians and resources are focused on the short term. Research and innovations link more medium to long term. And this explains also the very big gap that we have between publications of scientists and patents, and actually all these results that can be able to go into business or commercialized. Anyway, I think that I see, because I am 30 years in the industry, and it is the first time that we see that a specific discussion, especially after COVID, has started in Europe, and we are part of this discussion as a Greek industry in terms of our membership in Medicines for Europe, in Europe, and consequently in Greece for the next day. We have definitely, some political will more than before to prioritize R&D, innovation, and production in Europe and in Greece. And also there is a number of funds, much more than before, that is channeled in this direction. So these are the two positive things, and especially for a country like Greece, that it comes out of a recession after 10 years with more than 25 or 30% youth unemployment, with all these problems of bureaucracy and universities. This is an opportunity that we have to focus and find some more short-term solutions than other countries. In Greece also, another parameter that is interesting, and we always note it, is that we have a high level of scientists. Also, we have very high level of scientists in diaspora abroad, which is very, very important. Of course, we have not found the exact way and strategy and been more effective how to be able to bond these two groups. And of course, the blame lies here in Athens or in Greece more than the community of diaspora. Now, digitalization makes collaborations more easy in research as well, and innovation. And also now Greece has a production and R&D base that is better than 10 years ago, even though we went through a crisis. As I said, at the moment, it is a prioritization for the Greek companies. There are not very many, but there is there. And we start to see an increased ecosystem and really a number of opportunities in digital health, technology, life and other sciences. And, I believe that this is something that we have to see how we will channel into our research. Research is something long time, innovation, and also how we will be able to bridge the gap between industry and academia.
Theodoros, thank you for those comments. And, and again, I see a number of, comments in the chat with regards to, how we continue to nurture and give our young scientists the opportunities and the sort of the chance to continue to thrive in some ways in that regard, based upon experience and studies. And you sort of mentioned the framework there. Maybe just a little bit more, if you can maybe elaborate a little bit more. Does the framework need to continue to evolve? Are we moving in the right direction? It sounds very positive.
We are trying to move in the right direction. I mean, Definitely, I'm optimistic as we are, making a big investments now in this area in Greece. But we see a number of funds to be channeled in this direction. We see now that the collaboration with universities in certain areas is in a better framework than before. We see the government that is trying to have an umbrella and is trying actually to, first of all, to describe, to have a database for the ecosystem and then link the whole ecosystem together. Because there were many, and of course in the States it is more normal, but in a small country like Greece with limited funds, a small number of big companies, you have to have everybody under an umbrella and with synergies. We had many approaches that were not linked even till 2 years ago. We had a very promising institute, EVA. We had DITE, we had Demokritos, Fleming, many collaborations with the University of Thessaloniki, of Athens, but they were not interlinked and interrelated. So you need to be able to have a kind of set of an umbrella. It is not easy, but as I said, sometimes after 10 years, what I have to say, after 10 years or 15 years of big crisis, we also Greeks realize that we have to go to another model from services or from easy stock market money, and now, quote unquote, the new generation is more hungry, which is always, as the esteemed speakers that went as a second generation or first generation abroad, being hungry is a motive. Not only being hungry for money, but how to find a way forward. So the elements are there. I think we need at least 2 or 3 years where we will be able to channel all these funds, all these incentives, the scientists, the business under an umbrella. Is it easy? No. Can we do it on our own? No. Synergies? Yes. With diaspora? Definitely. With companies from Europe? Definitely.
George, please.
George was first.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment both about Greek talent, maybe the diaspora, and something that definitely has to be discussed in this forum. I mean, one thing that we have to talk about and recognize is I find it remarkable, and I don't think it's a coincidence, that the leadership of so many of the major biopharma companies in the United States and in the world are Greek. You talk now about Pfizer, you talk about Biogen, you talk about Regeneron, you talk about AstraZeneca, you talk about Alnylam, you talk about Vir. These are all Greeks who are leading these companies. I think that is astounding. Many of them are actually Greeks from the diaspora. And I think that this is something that we need to discuss and try to understand. It has to speak something about either the Greek mind or the Greek spirit, or actually the process of the diaspora and the impact that it had on those Greeks. But it cannot be simply a coincidence. There's only 8 million Greeks, on the planet, and that means that roughly 1 in 1,000 people. How is it that so much of the leadership of the top, biopharma companies are Greek? It defies, statistical odds. It means something is going on there.
Right.
Yeah, agreed. Spyros, please.
I just, I'm amused by the fact that George raises the possibility that somehow genetics have to do with it. That is quite amusing, I must say.
Or it could be the spirit. It could be spiritual, for all I know.
I think that's much. I would go more in that direction. Anyway,
they're all key contributors.
I just wanted to make a couple of points regarding the Greek scientific ecosystem. One of the biggest problem that I see, and I see it now in very concrete terms, is that the ecosystem that exists does not give the right hope, and it does not allow the young people to have the ambition to take a job in Greece. I mean, there are no opportunities, really, scientific opportunities.
Right.
So that is something that we have to enlarge. That is something that we have to support.
Right.
And the other thing is that one of the biggest obstacles, let's say the money stays exactly as it is, no more money for science. If we were to correct the bureaucracy that exists around implementing science in Greece, universities, pharma companies as well, I presume, this will go a very long way in correcting a lot of things. We are a small country. We have to focus. There's no doubt about that. But there is an incredible amount of talent, as George said. There's a lot of talent which goes by the wayside because there are no opportunities. And if the professor at the university, their salary is like, what is it, 2,000 euros a month? Maybe less. A postdoc gets 800 euros or something. This is not the way, you cannot live on these things. So if you are talented, if you are smart, if you are hardworking, well, you go to George's company or you come to Harvard if you can.
Well, I do have to add exactly to that point, which is that many of you may know that we have a lot of talented next generation leaders at Regeneron. One of them, Christos Kyratsous. Okay, he was educated in Greece, and he's only example of many. He's just one who's gaining a lot of fame because he developed our antibody cure against COVID-19. And it's like Spyros said, for the opportunities and so forth for graduate school and for a job, he came to America and he came to Regeneron. So there is obviously a brain drain. There is somehow this incredible talent that's seeding so many companies throughout the world. But it would be nice to understand how to create more of the opportunities so some of this talent either goes back or doesn't leave Greece itself.
That's right,
Great, yeah.
First, as a friend of Greece, I'm not Greek, but I love Greece and Greek culture. We need to kind of take a step back for a moment. Innovation has been the hallmark of your culture. Democracy was invented in Greece, right? Philia was invented in Greece. The women of Sparta initiated the first nonviolent movement to bring peace to your country. So the tradition of innovation is millennia old in your country. And George's point, by enumerating the plethora of Greek innovators in diaspora, reflects that rich tradition that is millennia old. But on what soil did these inventors develop? Regrettably, not in Greece in modern history, in the UK, in the US. So it's an issue of systemic problem that exists in the host country that we need to help to enhance. And having heard the plethora of talent that George enumerated, one idea, concrete idea that I would suggest is that we need to develop a set of partnerships between the leaders of the Greek community in diaspora and the sciences and in policymaking. They need to go hand in glove. Innovation in science and policy-making decisions need to be a collaborative project between the diaspora and Greece. Because if you go only on one track, you remain stuck. At the moment, clearly, the diaspora recognizes these issues, but we need to develop a project that addresses both at the same time and in an integrated fashion.
Great. I think you're absolutely right. It's being able to identify those key drivers. I think it's being able to minimize, bureaucracy and to be able to nurture talent. I think we've got, a great opportunity here. How do we do that from a very early stage? I also look at it in terms of continuity. There has to be continuity in what we're trying to do here. And there has to be a very clear line of guidance and objective, prioritization, without, again, going back to that main thing, without stifling innovation. The one sort of area that I did want to touch on was, how do we think about it from a future state perspective? We've experienced many things over the last 12 months and over the years. We've talked on and focused on some really important themes today. What about the future? In terms of innovation, in terms of scientific accomplishment, what else do we need to do differently in order to ensure that we are continuing to challenge the boundaries and raise the hurdle? What are the thoughts?
I think one of the things we need to think about is what kind of educational system we want in the 21st century. I think the Cartesian model of either or is outdated. I think we need to develop an educational system that is systemic, systematic, and integrative. I think the kind of great breakthroughs in science that George is talking about starts with basic science, but it gets applied to clinical, right? It's applied to clinical. It stimulates further investment. So from early on in life, young people, children need to understand the systemic nature of reality. And that while we need the basic tools for reductionistic basic science research, we need to also teach them the holistic integrative models of communication and integration. That complementarity between the basic reductionistic and systemic holistic integrative needs to be the hallmark of the 21st century science and education. And we need to think about investing in human capital development, not just investing in all kinds of things, cars, etc. We need to make a highest priority in the 21st century to invest in human capital development. And the best trajectory of investing in human capital development is the educational system and creating the opportunities for the young, emerging, best and brightest. We create equal opportunities for all, but we have to recognize there'll be also among the equal opportunities, there'll be best and brightest that need also additional nurturing and preparation. So that kind of a nuanced educational system with an integrative, systemic, and high specificity to also nurturing the extraordinary talents needs to be a very high priority for all governments.
I couldn't agree more. I really do think that it's several of the issues that Eliot raised. It starts with, let's call them policymakers, but really leadership. And somehow we have to get better leadership or communicate better what the real issues are, including exactly what Eliot is just talking about. I look at, my life, I was a child of the 60s. To me, for those of you who are too young to even know or remember, John F. Kennedy was, whatever you think of him, he was such a proponent of science and technology. And for those of us who had to read his speeches after he was assassinated, it was all about the fact that science and technology could change the future and that we had to invest more and more in that. And he was calling, it was a call to arms. And the arms were to use the weapons of science and technology to change the world. And many of us believed it. And at the time, I think belief is so much turns into reality. If you believe and you're raised with that notion, right, then the best and the brightest will get inspired and engaged. But we do have to make sure that the educational system is there to support it. And that's where it starts. But leadership has to have that as an imperative to communicate it and to engage and inspire those at the youngest ages, but then continue to support it and invest in it throughout the entire continuum. So somehow, and I know this is something we've talked a lot about, we're scientists, but part of our responsibility is to be educators and communicators and translators. And somehow we have to get better policymakers and leadership in government. If we don't do that, we're not going to be doing a good job of implementing everything we need to do that Eliot was just articulating.
I agree. Yeah, I think it's being able to extrapolate it, George, to your point, in very practical terms. To your point, we've been in drug development for many years. We focus on the patient. And we should always have the patient at the epicenter of everything that we're doing. But it has to be driven by good science and great ideas. And how do we harness that, from a very early age, nurture it, that point about continuity, implementing processes and ways of being able to do this in a very tangible manner, and to give people the opportunity to thrive and develop. But I think your examples of some of the leadership within the biopharma industry is motivational. So hopefully, our participants, are inspired by what other Greeks have been able to achieve in science and will continue to do so. I know we only have about 10 minutes or more left. I want to sort of focus a little bit maybe on the future state and get thoughts from the panel. We talk about innovation. We talk about decentralized trials, big data. What is the future? Because I also see this as an opportunity for our young scientists to really thrive and focus if we can implement these very tangible processes to help and guide along the way. But thoughts on the future state before we sort of close out the session?
Well, I'll take a shot at it.
Where do you want to start? You choose.
Go ahead, Spyros. Go ahead.
No, please.
I think we've talked. Our conversation so far, I think, has focused on the north of the globe. We need to think about also the rest of the world as well. And we need to think about, while I was advocating a partnership between the Greek eminent scientists and the diaspora with Greece, we should also think about what other partnerships we want to engage in addition to the European and the North American space. There's a whole world. And I was inspired, for instance, by the initiative found recently that India, for instance, has the largest capacity to produce vaccines. 60% of the world's capacity of vaccine production is in India. So we need to think about, is there a lesson to be learned? What did they do? What did they do that is right? It's right for the moment, certainly, to have that capacity. So I would suggest that in addition to focusing on the issues so well discussed so far, so clearly outlined by George and by Spyros, to think about partnerships also not only in the north of the globe space, but also with others from around the world, and how this may stimulate our young people to further innovations in collaborations with other young people around the world.
Great. Science is global, absolutely. Final thoughts from the panel, please. George.
Well, I just want to add to this point. When people talk about the future, and they want to often ask, what's the next big thing? Is it artificial intelligence, which I don't actually think is all it's cracked up to be? Is it this? Is it that? A few years ago, we celebrated our 25th anniversary at Regeneron, and I was wondering what to say or what to talk about. And I sort of just looked up other companies at their 25th anniversary, and I happened to look up at Apple. And I realized that on their 25th anniversary, they hadn't even had the thought of an iPad or an iPhone. That all came after their 25th anniversary. And what that makes me think of is what I tell our people every day. What's the next big thing? Yeah. I want you to go into our next big brainstorming meeting and come up with it. The next big thing is not what somebody's already thought of. It's what nobody else has yet imagined.
Right.
And that is how I was raised. That's those of us who were raised in the 60s when it was such a decade of hope and an impossible imaginations. We thought we would already be, have technologies that would get us to the rest of the universe and so forth. That's what we should be trying to think of. The things that we can't even imagine today are going to be the big things of the future, and that's what we should be striving for.
Right. Agreed, fully agreed. Spyros, please, and then I'll come to Theodoros.
I will sound like a broken record, but I think that the most important thing for the future is investing in education.
Yeah.
I completely agree with Professor Sorel, and I think that on science education, as George said, and as I said again, is something, it's a long-term investment. If we don't do that, then we will be dead. It is our future. It is indeed the survival of the species. And I think we can do it in Greece. We have the seeds to do it in Greece and outside Greece. I mean, the Greek presence in the biopharma industry and in academia, actually, I should say, is enormous if you look at the numbers. It's absolutely staggering. Whether it's genetics or spiritual, I don't know, but it's there. It's a fact. So, and I think, as I said, in Greece, we do have the opportunity to make things happen. I am optimistic. I think that, as Mr. Tryfon said, there are some signs that things are going in the right direction. So let's keep it up.
Theodoros, please, the final comment from your side, and then I'll kind of wrap up and pass back to Paula.
Well, I totally agree that it is a long-term process. However, we should set some specific short-term goals. Speaking about Greece, Cyprus, and the environment ecosystem here, definitely we should multiply the grants, the research grants, quadruple 10 times. This is something that we need to convince everybody to have in a budget. So it is something very, very important. Otherwise, it's the only way of keeping some people here in Greece. Secondly, we should have under an umbrella the whole ecosystem and try and organize it and try and have some synergies within that. And I am sure that we will find some ears that are willing to listen now within the political party or parties. It is not easy, but we're on the right track. So these are some short-term goals. And if we start tackle these together with bureaucracy, meritocracy, and some other problems that we have in Greece, maybe there is a hope, and maybe we're going to start also here doing some very specific job about the next day for, let's say, personalized medicine, for bioinformatics, all these things that come with the lessons of the COVID and the needs that, as also Dr. Yancopoulos said, that we have to go not to the next steps, but think some steps ahead. And maybe there are some minds in Greece that can help to that. But for me, it is very, very crucial to focus now, and everybody from his position, to exert some pressure to the system with limited resources, to channel the resources in a correct way. There will be some funds from Europe. There are some specific investments for R&D related tax investments. And we should try and take advantage of every last penny of those.
Thank you. So let me just wrap up by saying, first of all, it was an honor for me to moderate this esteemed, distinguished group of speakers as part of this panel exercise. I'm certainly, motivated by what I've heard, and we're all very passionate about, science and medicine and what we can continue to do for patients. And I think with the right processes and infrastructure and the ideas that we've, discussed today, I think, the future remains bright. So thank you all again, and thank you for all of our participants and the questions.
And I personally would like to thank every single one of you. I have been here all day with all of you, and it's so inspiring hearing all of you, the work, the dedication that you have for what you're doing, representing our countries abroad. And I would like to ask all of you something. You're all talented, you're all skilled, you're very clever people, obviously. You have achieved a lot, and you're abroad. You are thriving in countries abroad. What would you like to see from the countries that they gave birth to you, so as for more people to be in your position, for more people to be able to achieve the things that perhaps you didn't have the means to achieve when you first started? Allow me to ask Dr. Panhellenic, and then feel free to comment on this.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. So, I can certainly share some thoughts from my side, and then other members of the panel, of course, should, of course, weigh in. And we've kind of discussed it. We tried to capture it in its essence. It's identifying and nurturing, that scientific curiosity. We should nurture it. It's curious. And I think that's what really leads to the great ideas, the translation in science, and really being able to then, develop something solution-wise that's going to be very, very tangible. That was certainly my journey, and I've been humbled and honored over the years, to have been able to achieve many good things as part of a collaboration and a partnership with many other stakeholders. So, those are some thoughts from my side, but I'd certainly open it up to other members of the panel as well, of course.
Of course, Professor Spyros.
Well, again, I'm not going to repeat myself again, but I think that unfortunately there is no specific formula, except if George, in his inventiveness, finds a drug that I will swallow and I'll become successful and smart. But this will take. It maybe it will be possible, but it will only be possible if we support innovation, and if we support creativity, and we support, I think, curiosity-driven science. Curiosity-driven science is becoming almost a dirty word, not only in Greece, because this is long-term and it's for academics, but also in the United States. So let's support that, and I think everything else will fall in place.
Thank you. Dr. George Yancopoulos.
Well, I once again, it sounds like a broken record. I agree totally with Spiro that there's too much of an interest in applied science, because people think that, oh, if we apply science to solve this problem, we will solve it, not realizing that most solutions come from completely unanticipated beginnings. But to answer your question in particular, and we haven't completely touched upon, the biggest thing to me, not only was I raised at a time where I think that science was more exalted in society, and leadership encouraged this focus and interest in becoming a scientist and in the power of science, and supported education in a way that I think we're getting away from. But another thing that I think is very important is belief, okay, in communicating to children and the next generation that they really can do anything. And one thing that's very important in terms of giving children belief, I believe, is giving them role models that they can identify with. And to me, there was nothing more important than that. And I think one of the reasons why I went into my chosen field is my parents were poor. They were refugees coming from war-torn Greece. They had nothing. They didn't have an education. But they told me about all the other great Greeks who had done so much, whether it was ancient Greeks, or in my case, they also gave me the example of Roy Vagelos, who was the first great Greek leader in the biopharmaceutical industry who changed everything. He was a first-generation Greek immigrant like I was. And they said, hey, his parents had no education. They brought him to America. Look what he did. You can become like him. So I think that this notion of the focus on the youth, the focus on the education, spirit of science and curiosity, but also giving our children the belief that they can do anything by showing them that others just like them have done amazing things and can do anything. And I think we do have a whole new generation, particularly in the sciences and the biopharma industry, where we can show and we can tell these kids, hey, we have people who've cured diseases. We have people who've invented incredible things. You can go out there, you can do that for the next generation.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. We need to keep telling the youth, you can do it. If we did it, you can do it, and you can do it better. Mr. Theodoros Tryfon?
Yes, I mean, I think it has all been said very specifically, but definitely this crisis has upgraded the profile of scientists. So now we have some examples, and it is very, very important. Also, we definitely need commitment to that, and we need some examples there, and also the key opinion leaders to give a direction, either politicians or university professors or business people and institutions. For me, it is very encouraging that 3 of the largest Greek tycoons of the diaspora, through foundations, Onassis foundations, Niarchos foundations, and Latsis foundations, all have interest now in sciences, or are investing or willing to invest in research and institutions in Greece in one way or another. And this also gives a tendency, gives a direction, gives jobs and grants to students. Also, there are some efforts we're doing, smaller but indicative. We're doing this new research center as ELPEN, where we believe that we'll be able, after 2 or 3 years, to have at least 20 to 30 grants initially for scientists for basic research on specific therapeutic areas. And there are many other efforts like that, small, but they add up. So, we see some of these things in Greece. It's not easy, but we have to give.
We're trying.
We have to keep trying. There are some very good examples from abroad, so we have to keep trying.
Of course. I would like to thank you all once again. And ladies and gentlemen, just to let you know, with this last panel, we came to conclude our live discussion. We will proceed now in a network discussion, a roundtable discussion, if we can name it, which will last for about 20 minutes. You can see that on your platform. But before officially closing the first virtual symposium of the Greek Scientists Society, I would like to thank every single one of you for taking the time to attend today. It's a Sunday. Many people are resting. Many people are using their Sundays to relax. Thank you for connecting with us. Thank you to all the panelists, the moderators, the attendees, and of course, thank our sponsors for making this happen, and every person who worked behind the scenes. We apologize for any technical issues we have, but this is the new era. This is the way that we need to learn and adjust to perform in our best, to do our best every time. We believe that we managed to have a successful event. Special thanks to Earth World for transmitting the symposium, and special thanks to every corner of the globe where Hellenes exist, live, work, and most and above all, they thrive. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Have a good day, good afternoon, and good evening.